All right, folks, so let us talk about biological weathering. All right, biological weathering is in fact associated with living things. As the word suggests, biological, referring to biotic components, that is associated with living things. And living things can be subcategorized into the major kingdoms, referring to plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. So both plants and animals can in fact be operational in terms of biological weathering processes. Now, out of three major biological processes of weathering, we have root penetration, we have the burrowing of animals, all right, that means they dig. We also have the secretion of organic acids. All right, let's go through each of them individually. Let us look at this particular diagram, or let's look at root penetration. Vegetation or trees, from the smallest plants all the way up to the largest trees, they actually have roots. And roots, silently, very slowly, yet continuously, they tend to grow. These roots tend to grow and they anchor themselves onto existing surfaces, including solid rock structures. Now, what they will do, they will actually find a relatively weak part of that existing rock and they will tend to break it down. They will tend to permeate and dig further into those particular rocks. And by extension, as they grow, they increase in size, they increase in thickness, they increase in depth, and they eventually push apart these rocks. Look at the significance of these root systems. And this is actually very, very important because why is it associated with biological weathering? Because it is in fact the roots belonging to trees. Trees are in fact living organisms. All right. But this is actually undergoing physical pushing apart or physical breakage of these rocks. But it is actually done so via biological means or vice versa. It is biologically breaking down these rocks, but it is physically pushing apart these surfaces or the structures as these root systems become much more pronounced. All right. Should bear in mind that these particular trees, referring to the ancient trees, all the way up to these trees that exist today. All right. If they give them sufficient time, they will eventually grow and they will become, they would manifest into very distinctive structures. All right. Which would aid in the breaking down and the weathering of rocks. All right. Which is technically considered to be biophysical weathering. Why? Because the rocks are physically pushed apart, but it's done through via biological means. But we give it a separate context primarily because living things are in fact involved. Plants are in fact alive. Okay? Now, the second process is that of burrowing of animals. Now, animals like this particular organism here is actually digging straight down into the ground, like little beavers and stuff like that. They will actually dig further into the ground. Ants will do the exact same thing. And in doing so, they create passageways or channels. Right? Some of them are very much equipped. Right? Look at the claws on this particular organism. They will also have um, small organisms as such, for example, ants and termites and stuff like that. Not really termites, so termites actually affect wood. But these particular organisms, they will excavate, they will dig, and they will mine further down into the ground. They have a tendency of disassociating or breaking or disintegrating rocks with their specialized characteristics. Now, not only larger organisms can do this. All right, we have other organisms such as simple smaller ones, for example, the earthworm that is grasped basically by this particular organism here. Earthworms have the tendency of also breaking apart rocks. All right, very slowly, as a matter of fact. All right, because of their development and their characteristic involved. It is relatively slowly, relatively slow, sorry. But this is important, right? So keep in mind, organisms of varying sizes, especially those of which are in fact soil-bearing organisms, soil-dwelling organisms, all right, edaphic organisms, edaphic species, they have a tendency to burrow or to dig into the ground. And in doing so, they aid in the weathering process. All right, okay. Now, students, with respect to the secretion of organic acids, all right, which is in fact the third process, this can be done by both plants and animals. Let's focus on plants first. There are in fact certain pioneer species species which often inhabit like barren landscapes and whatnot, and even rocks, and even they kind of also exist on the surfaces of branches and these things. This is in fact what they call lichens. All right, there are different types, of course. Lichens, this particular plant-like structure, very small, but has a tendency of secreting organic acids. For example, on this piece of rock on the surface here, lichens will establish themselves providing that there is sufficient moisture, all right, on these barren rocks. And in doing so, they will naturally secrete acids from their own structures. These acids will gradually break apart these rocks chemically. Now, these rocks are chemically disassociated, but it is influenced by biological processes because plants are biological organisms. So, hence, this is what you call a biochemical process. All right, but we generally categorize it as being biological. For example, this particular plant-like substance would actually secrete acids which will chemically disassociate the rocks. So keep that in mind for me, please. All right. Now, this was a kind of weird one because animals also secrete a bit of acids. All right, directly or indirectly, as a matter of fact. Now, animals generally pass off their waste and their waste, or I should say their poop, as you can see from the images here, right? Whether it be poop or from urine and whatnot, the natural substances that is secreted, oh sorry, that is actually expelled as this breaks down on the surface of the earth, acid is essentially being exposed and also have a settling effect on the surface of the land. All right, this acid can actually tend to weaken the structural or chemical integrity of rocks, and in doing so, help to weather them as well. All right, so this is also chemical substances can be produced from animals as well in the form of their waste. Now, these organic acids, also known as chelating agents, all right, chelating, chelating, chelating agents, they tend to really move down further into the soil column and also impact upon other existing rock structures and pebbles and so forth which may exist. All right, so chelating agents from the organic waste are organic waste produced from the organisms themselves, the animals themselves. They tend to basically facilitate the disintegration, the chemical disintegration of rocks. Okay. Sorry about my dogs back in the background there. They like to make noise, especially when I'm doing that video. Sorry about that. Okay, so I hope this was actually very important and informative for you all. If any questions, you all feel free to ask. All right, biological processes of weathering. So by now, you would have actually gone through physical, chemical, as well as biological. This is in fact the last video for weathering, and always remember these occur at different rates throughout. All right, students, you'll keep good. Any questions? Feel free to ask.